Hi, I'm Ellen Dixon, filming the Mayor's Show for the City of Summit. With me today is Chris Cotter, our City Administrator. And today we're going to do a show about a survey that Chris actually requisitioned. It was his idea. Back when we were struggling with budget cuts, we're wondering what services do citizens of Summit really want and need, and which ones are less important. So Chris came up with the idea of doing a survey of the citizens of Summit. He applied for a grant from the Summit Area Public Foundation in the amount of $10,000, and he was awarded the grant. So we've just received the survey results, and we're going to go over them today with you. Chris, would you like to explain the background for what questions were asked and how it was formulated, and the company that actually did it?
Thank you, Mary. I'd be happy to. This is a product that's created by the National Research Center, which is a group that works in concert with the International City-County Management Association. And they've developed a survey instrument that is more than 100 questions that is intended to learn what the community, members of the community, feel about services that are delivered within that community, and to get a sense for what that community is like, what the level of satisfaction is with their particular community, in our case, Summit. This is the first time that the city has participated in a survey like this, and the benefit of it is to allow elected officials to be able to get feedback from a representative sampling of the community about those services to help us plan for the future, to make those kinds of decisions that you mentioned at the outset. We found that the information is very revealing, and this morning we're going to talk a little bit about just a sampling of some of the responses. There are many more than we'll talk about this morning, and all of those are available online at www.cityofsummit.org. Okay.
And to give you a background on who were the respondents, who actually responded to the survey. 32% have lived in Summit for more than 20 years, 7 in 10 own their own home, 6 in 10 live in a single-family home. The largest group of 44% of respondents reported housing costs of $2,500 or more per month. 59% did not have children under 17 at home. The household income of 48% of the respondents was $150,000 or more annually. 13% identified themselves as Spanish, Hispanic, or Latino. 85% described themselves as white, 8% Asian, 4% black, 6% other, which is about what we've seen in the census, I believe. 53% were female. The largest cohort, or 26%, was the 45 to 54-year-old age group. 83% are registered voters. 51% have a landline. 27% a cell phone, and 22% had both. 25% reported that either they or a member of their household was 65% or older. Now we're going to go fairly quickly into a number of the slides.
Now, the slide that you're seeing now is a map of Summit, and it shows the distribution fairly equally of the 1,200 households that were selected at random. Of those 1,200 households, 419 returned the mail-in survey. That's a response rate of about 36%, which is considered to be very high, and it gives a margin of error to the survey results of plus or minus 5%. So if we talk this morning about a response rate being 60% good or excellent, what that means is that anywhere from 55 to 65% of the members of this community are likely to feel that way. It really is considered to be an accurate survey instrument and results. And I'm pleased to say that Summit compares very favorably with benchmark communities. We looked at not just how the community feels about services delivered just in Summit, but also those services are then compared to many others in a database, and in some cases as many as 500 other communities, to see how Summit stacks up in that regard. So while there's always room for improvement, overall the results are quite good.
So which slide are we starting with?
Well, the first slide that we can look at is the overall quality ratings for the community. In that case, what we see is that the respondents believe that Summit was rated excellent or good by 91% of the respondents. So I think that's certainly confirming for all of us who make Summit our home and are committed to making Summit even a better place. So,
and to the benchmark, that comes in much above where other communities have fared.
It does, exactly. So that's that's really a positive kind of response overall, and certainly a good place to start. What the reaction is of the overall community, and then there are more breakdowns about that in terms of the particular neighborhood and how respondents felt about their neighborhood. And in those cases, that was rated at about 85% felt that their neighborhood was a very good place to live. And again, that's much above the benchmark communities. One of the others that is interesting is the likelihood to remain in the community into the future. And some 80% roughly said that remaining in the Summit for the next 5 years is what they intend to do. So again, there's a sentiment and a sense for some longevity in the community as well. The next slide looks at ratings for transportation and parking services, and those are very much related to mobility around the community, which is an important aspect of living within a community. And basically, Summit rated well in those regards. Street repair was considered to be similar to benchmark communities. Street cleaning, interestingly, was much above. So from that, we take that citizens seem to be very pleased with the level of cleanliness of our streets in the community. The street lighting, things like snow removal and sidewalk maintenance were all rated as similar to benchmark communities. Bus or transit services, and perhaps this is not surprising, were rated much above. Summit as a hub on the New Jersey Transit line, and with so many commuters, that was important.
A main reason people move here.
But one of the interesting questions that was asked is the availability of public parking. And in this case, it was shown that those respondents believe that the availability or amount of public parking in Summit is much below what the benchmark communities are.
That's interesting, since coming up in our next few council meetings, we'll be discussing paid parking on DeForest. But it was quite clear that on the amount of public parking, our respondents felt we were much below what they would expect.
The next slide that we'll be looking at is a rating of the community's built environment. And again, an important aspect of how all of us would view the community. And the questions were somewhat interesting. One was the overall appearance of Summit. And the overall appearance of Summit was rated as excellent or good by 92% of the respondents. And again, I think that's a confirming kind of result for most of us who believe that Summit really is a beautiful community, and that's affirmed by these responses. The other one I think is very interesting as well, and that tells us something about the overall quality of new development in Summit. Over the course of the past several years, we've had a fair amount of new development in the community, from the whole phenomenon of tear-downs to some new development within our central retail business district. And in those cases, the overall quality of new development in the city of Summit was rated as excellent or good by some nearly 70% of the respondents. So again, a fairly strong measure of approval of those two areas. The next slide has to do with public safety and safety in general in the community. Feeling safe in a community is certainly an important aspect of how well you see your community, and it's related to vibrancy of the community. Summit, in this regard, stacked up quite well in terms of how the respondents feel and how safe they feel. There's a question that asks not just how safe do you feel in the community, but how safe do you feel after dark? How safe do you find the downtown specifically, and how safe is the downtown after dark, and violent crimes, property crimes, and so forth. Really, the takeaway from this, though, is that members of our community that have responded to this, and we feel it's a representative sampling, believe that in the downtown and in the community in general, both day and night, Summit ranks very much above other communities in terms of a sense of safety within the community.
They are very safe here, and I'm glad that they recognize that.
There's also a slide that we'll be showing you, and this really rates the community and public safety. So in this case, the respondents were asked to rate police, fire, EMS, our municipal courts, traffic enforcement, and generally emergency preparedness. It's not uncommon to have public safety services ranked relatively high as compared to, for example, perhaps road improvements. So it is very important to take a look at public safety against other benchmarks in communities. In Summit, the community rated our police department as either good or excellent, 94%, which is very high. Our fire department at 98%, our emergency medical services delivered by the first aid squad at 95%, and overall emergency preparedness was ranked at about 70%.
It's just interesting between police and fire. I think police sometimes feel that they don't rank as high because if you've been stopped by the police, you're not quite as happy as you are with the firemen who maybe bailed you out of a very difficult situation.
Well, and that's
so
true.
That's part of the difference, I think, with the police and fire.
I think so, but
still, the rankings at 94 and 98% are just excellent.
They really are, and looking at the benchmarks, police, fire, EMS, crime prevention, fire prevention and education, our courts, and our emergency preparedness all ranked much above the benchmark communities. The one area, traffic enforcement, ranks similar to our benchmark communities. And while that's not a cause for concern, that would be the only one that's not much above our benchmark community, so we'll be looking at that.
Well, what do you really look at when you look at traffic enforcement? Do they mean slowed traffic, traffic jams,
I think
timing of lights?
Well, timing of lights actually was a separate question that was asked on the survey, and in that case, the survey respondents reacted positively to traffic sequencing in our community, which I thought was an interesting response. But traffic enforcement, it really is all of those things that you mentioned, and I think we, and certainly the governing body, hears a lot of concerns from constituents about speeding in neighborhoods. So all those kinds of things come together in terms of traffic enforcement, but it could also mean that a respondent felt negatively about it because they received a citation. Another aspect that's important for the community has to do with the community's natural environment. And this slide looks at responses with regard to cleanliness of Summit, overall natural environment within the community, preservation of natural areas, and air quality. And Summit ranks much above in terms of other benchmark communities for cleanliness of our community. Our overall natural environment is above the benchmark communities, and the preservation of areas of open space and farmlands is considered to be similar, and our air quality is much above.
Wow. We all wish we had a little more open space, but maybe as we develop the Passaic River as a recreational vehicle, people will see more of our natural splendor.
Yeah, that certainly would be it's a wonderful attribute in our community. It'd be great to highlight that. The next slide has to do with ratings of so-called utility services. And in that case, we're looking at things like sewer services, storm drainage, yard waste pickup, recycling, and garbage collection. And while these aren't necessarily the kinds of things that are particularly glitzy in a community, they're absolutely important. And I'm pleased to say that each of these services were ranked similar to or above all benchmark communities. But notable in this slide is garbage collection. And garbage collection is rated at 93% excellent or good from our respondents, placing it much above benchmark communities, and it is very much in the top percentile. This is something that I think it's fair to say our residents hold near and dear, their garbage collection.
Well, we still have our own staff. We have not taken it out of the tax bill and had residents get privatized, so we are able to customize it a little bit more, I think, for our residents, whether they pick up probably more than they should at times, because we do have ordinances in effect as to what should be picked up and how the trash cans should look. They should be lidded, but we've been a little lenient on that. But I'm happy to hear that.
So was I, and certainly the rear yard collection of garbage, it removes the visual of having garbage cans lining the street, and it certainly seems as though the residents react very positively to that. The next slide is a reflection of the ratings of community and recreational opportunities. And we rated quite well with that, but there's much more in the report, and I would urge those who may have an interest in learning more about that. It is on our website, but in this particular slide, we're looking at a pie chart, and it shows that the recreational opportunities were rated as good or excellent by some 73% of the respondents. And that is above the overall benchmark communities. Cultural and educational opportunities are important in Summit, and this next slide looks at those who have used library services and those who may have participated in religious or spiritual activities in Summit. And 91% rated our public school as excellent, and actually that's on the next slide, but they rated, 93% rated our public library as excellent or good, and some 82% have used that in the last 12 months. So there's lots of activity, and this confirms it with our library.
That's interesting in this day and age when you think everybody's just reading on their Kindles and that they're still visiting the public library.
Yeah, it still seems to be the place to go. The next slide looks at the ratings of community quality and inclusiveness in our community, and an overall sense of community is explored. Availability and affordability of quality child care, Summit as a place to raise children, and Summit as a place to retire. Now, all of those areas, a sense of community is much above the benchmark. Openness and acceptance of the community toward people of diverse backgrounds is another area that is explored, and that ranks Summit as similar to benchmark communities. Availability of quality child care is above, and Summit as a place to raise kids is much above benchmark communities. And again, perhaps that's confirming and maybe not surprising, but the next item, Summit as a place to retire, is much below the benchmark communities. And perhaps that too is not surprising, but it's something certainly to consider going forward as a planning matter.
Well, it ties into the census numbers we've seen also. We're really losing the 65 and older group. And I think we have to encourage people to think about aging in place and everything we have here, from medical facilities to entertainment to ease of transportation. And maybe we need some more affordable housing as far as senior living, even more condos and apartments, because a lot of my friends want to downsize, and it's hard to do in Summit, and it's very hard to maintain it on a retired income. So that is something I do worry about, that we're losing that population.
Our next slide is looking at quality of services provided to population subgroups. Our Department of Community Programs and several other not-for-profits in the community deliver services to seniors and youth, and if we look at the results here, we see that the community responds very positively to that. So some 73% believe that the services to seniors are either excellent or good in Summit, and the services to low-income folks also are excellent or good, rated that way by some 65% of the respondents in all of those categories, from seniors to youth to services for low-income population, are much above what you would find in other benchmark communities.
I guess the surprise there is that I know we have a huge emphasis on youth in our community, but the fact that so many seniors were satisfied with their activities was encouraging.
The ratings of civic engagement, the more that the community is involved and assists in delivering any level of services in the community, from volunteering on boards to not-for-profits to the Common Council, makes the community a much better, stronger community. And Summit has a great number of opportunities for civic involvement and opportunities to volunteer in each of these categories on this slide. We see that we are much above the benchmark communities. Mm-hmm. The next slide is somewhat interesting. That has to do with contact with immediate neighbors. And there's much talk these days about how, as a society, we're very busy. We don't have a lot of time for helping or working with neighbors. This slide, the pie chart, shows what kinds of and how often we may have had contact with immediate neighbors, whether it's several times a month, less than several times a month, just about every day, and so forth. So you can see that breakdown. And while that part is interesting, what's more interesting is how we compare to benchmark communities, and the amount of contact that we've had at least several times per week is less than what our benchmark communities have had.
That's something I think we need to work on, and the police department through Chief Weck is really going forward with this Neighborhood Watch program. And I think particularly in a time when more and more people don't have landlines, you can't call information and contact your neighbor, you need to have at least an email chain of your neighbors. In the last two storms we had in the fall, the Hurricane Irene and the October storm, it really was important to be able to get in contact with people. And I really think every neighborhood should find a way to get at least the people on their block, their street, know who they are, and at least have email contact with them in the case of an emergency. So this is an area I think we can work on, and we will be.
Great. The next slide looks at the public trust, and surely for any community this is a foundational issue. We see that issues like services paid, what's the value of services paid for their taxes in Summit, the overall direction Summit is taking, the job Summit government does welcoming new citizens, and overall image and reputation of Summit. Our image, the reputation of Summit, is much above the benchmark communities. 99% of the respondents said that Summit's image and reputation was excellent or good. So that's wonderful, and it's certainly something that I think that we need to always be working toward preserving that. The other areas were rated similar or above the overall benchmarks.
Well, people pay a lot of money to live here by and large, and I think they expect a high level of service, and we keep that in mind, trying to balance fiscal austerity with the ability to provide the services, excellent services people expect, to keep our town at the top of its rank.
The next slide rates the services provided by local, state, and federal government. So in this case, Summit, the respondents are asked to rate the services provided by the City of Summit, and then by the federal government, by state government, and by county government. The ratings for local government are quite high. 83% believe that they are excellent or good. And then it works its way down through to local government. The state and federal governments are fairly similar to the benchmark communities. Our local government, the respondents' survey results are much above the benchmark. However, for services provided on the county level, they were found to be much below the benchmark communities.
And I'm going to be nice today and not comment on that.
We asked respondents to rate their contact with city employees. So there was a question that had to do with, have you been in contact with a city employee? And if so, how would you rate their knowledge, their responsiveness to your particular issue? Were they courteous? And your overall impression. And the results are gratifying. The knowledge base of our employees was found to be quite high. In 88% of the cases, they were found to be very good or excellent in terms of their knowledge of the particular issue. Their responsiveness was equally high, along with their courtesy and their overall impression. So we're pleased with that, and in cases of how those responses compared to the benchmark communities, they were above the benchmarks. So we're pleased about that. There's, again, always room for improvement, but overall quite high, and that's particularly gratifying for me and the work that all of our employees do on behalf of this community. We did fashion one custom question. There was a ability to do that in this survey, and we wanted to get a sense, and really the governing body wanted to get a sense for what's the best way and what's the most popular way that our community, members of the community, learn information about what's happening in Summit. So this next slide shows how members of the community really find out about local activities, and we found this interesting.
You're going to go over the results? Because I found it very illuminating.
We see that local newspapers continue to be a major source of local information for the community. Some 55% of respondents said that that was a major source. Some 13% used cable access. This is certainly a way. But 37% of those same respondents said that cable was also a minor source. So we have to look at that as another way to respond and to get the information out. And the city website, www.cityofsummit.org, is used as a major source of information for 43% of the respondents. And social media, not quite there yet, at 14% is a major source and 22% is a minor source, but we do know that it's certainly working its way up. Lots of different ways to communicate the
but
message.
even a year ago, we wouldn't have even asked that question. So that kind of growth in a year is amazing. And I'm really happy to see 43% going to the city website because that's the best way for us to inform our residents on a need-to-know basis.
And this next slide is a overall quality of City of Summit services. They're shown as either green or kind of a buff color. And in that case, it shows that they are either above or similar to the benchmark communities. And it breaks them all down from categories of community design, public safety, recreation and wellness, civic engagement, and environment and sustainability. Some number of those are considered to be key drivers, things like emergency preparedness, public schools, and traffic enforcement. And we know that from any kinds of work that we do with those, they're likely to influence an overall sense of community from the respondents. So very interesting information. We've given it kind of a quick overview during our meeting today, Mayor. But again, for residents who may want to learn more, it is on the city's website, www.cityofsummit.org, and I would urge them to take the time to read it. And certainly feel free to contact you, members of the governing body, or me. We're all can be contacted on the city's website if they have any questions, comments, or suggestions.
And thanks to all those who responded. I think you provided some very valuable information to us. And you will be meeting with department heads to go over this survey within the city? We
will be. We've had a presentation to Common Council at the last council meeting. I'll be meeting with various civic groups to show some of these survey results and different details of them. And I'm happy to engage with other members of the community in any way that we can, and to learn from this and to continue to get more feedback from it.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming today.
Thank you very much, Mayor.